Jews make up 2.2% of the U.S. population, but what exactly does it mean to be an American Jew in 2013? Well, the first major survey of American Jews in more than a decade, it seeks to get at the heart of that very question, and the answer is not simple, it's complex. Jewish people are increasingly identifying themselves as having no religion. For adult Jews born after 1980, 32%, a full third, said they have no religion. Now compare that to adults born in the 20s, and only 7% said that they had no religion connection to the same question. Intermarriage, it has also skyrocketed. 58% of American Jews are now intermarrying. Again, going back before 1970, only 17% did. And finally, since being Jewish is considered both a cultural and a religious category, the survey asked participants if they felt that being Jewish was more about religion or ancestry or both. Most said it was about ancestry and culture. So what does this all mean here for the Jewish identity in the 21st century? And obviously, these questions could be asked to different faiths here, but to focus on the Jewish question, let's bring in our next guest. We're joined by Rabbi Jaymee Alpert of Congregation KTI in Port Chester, New York. Rabbi, thank you very much for a few minutes.
Thank you.
Were you surprised, as close as you are, by any of the findings of this study, or did it mirror what you see?
It mirrors what I see. I think these trends have been pointing in this direction for a long time, so it wasn't surprising to me to see the numbers, to see the statistics, although it was certainly startling.
Is it enough to say, well, it's part of times, regardless of one's faith, the denomination? We're seeing a distracted youth, a distracted generation that looks to other things than going to houses of worship, or is it about something more?
That's the big question.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know that there's any easy answer for that because it's a combination. I don't think it's either or, I think it's both. Today's youth is growing up in a radically different time, and there are things, as you said, to distract today's youth that had never been invented before. So it's hard to know, and it's hard to separate out the factors, but as a rabbi, as a religious leader, I am worried about what this means for the future of American Jews.
While I think it's great that people feel comfortable in today's day and age to marry whoever they love, of whatever background, denomination, ethnicity, whatever else, there's a pronounced concern, especially when it relates to intermarrying in the Jewish faith for obvious reasons. Because you have a population of less than 3% of the national population, it's a real worry. How does that get addressed, or does it get addressed as it relates to, sustaining the faith here through family?
Well, the movements, the major American movements, have all addressed this issue differently over the last several decades as the rate of intermarriage began to rise in the 70s and the 80s, and most recently, of course.
Yep.
And each movement has addressed it a little bit differently. For the Orthodox world, in marriage is the way to go, and rabbis really drive that message home in their congregations. In the Reform movement, there's been a real openness. Please come and join us, join our synagogue, raise your children Jewish. We want to embrace you and give you a positive Jewish identity. And in the conservative movement, and I am a conservative rabbi, we've really struggled. For a long time, it was all about in marriage, Jews marrying other Jews. More recently, over the last 15 years or so, there's been an initiative called Keruv, which has really been reaching out to Jewish people who have married non-Jewish partners to try to make them feel at home in the Jewish community, in synagogues specifically, and also to encourage them to raise their children as Jewish.
One of the things I'm not sure people, in New York, I think people have a better idea, and when I say New York, I mean a metropolitan region, but certainly not in other parts. They think being Jewish, there's basically one singular faith, but there's a huge distinction between being Orthodox and being Reform. And again, knowing people, some of the Orthodox don't even consider people who are Reform Jewish as real Jews. Talk about that schism and how it depends on the population within the Jewish faith, these very same questions that we're talking about, not just the teachings, but also the perceptions. And how, depending on, I imagine if you just looked in the Reform wing of the Jewish faith, the numbers of intermarriage must be, if 58% is the average, they got to be 3/4 or something, right?
Sure. Sure, absolutely. There's no one Jewish voice, so it's helpful to have this survey because it gives us some basic numbers, some statistics to work off of. I would say that this survey is a real wake-up call if we pay attention to these numbers. On the other hand, you use the word schism. There's so many schisms. It's hard to have just one unilateral
spectrum of observance, right?
Yes.
From one end all the way to the other, and then it becomes cultural in addition to religious. Orthodox is Orthodox, and then you have degrees of cultural separation with the Haredi community and the far right wing.
When you see these numbers and hear these numbers as a practice to yourself, are you a little surprised? I mean, you look at the numbers from 70 to now and the huge disparity.
I'm not surprised. I do a lot of work first with Senator Schumer and now on my own professionally with the observant community, with the Torah community, and what I like to refer to as a sort of tier 1, tier 2 secular Jews, retired teachers in different parts of Brooklyn is very different than far right, culturally separate Haredi community, and then of course the Syrian Jewish community in New Jersey and Brooklyn and other parts of New York. But it's a big country, and what happens in LA and Chicago and Miami is very different than what happens in New York, which is why this study is so important, because we look at through the prism of just New York.
On the biggest difference from when you were a kid to when your kids go to temple now, like I mean, I've heard stories about kids are trying to bring in their their PDAs when the good rabbi is trying to get attention on Saturday. That never would have happened, you know.
I don't think so. I'm not the expert on that because that's just not how I was raised. It just happens to be where I found a home now. The difference is that. The difference is folks that drive to synagogue on Saturdays and the PDAs and the games.
But isn't this trend following along every other trend of Christians, Catholics who people are just not as engaged in religion as they used to be?
I think you're 100% right.
So everybody's subject to it apparently, and especially with the younger generation.
Right, but the rabbi's right. It's not a matter of schisms. It's a matter of spectrum of observance and how committed and how that is reflected in everyday life.
But I think, for example, in the Catholic community, at least I can speak more, it's a broader statement. And it doesn't matter as much geography as it does. It's the same challenges the church faces. They're facing, whether it's in New York or they're facing in Tennessee or they're facing in California. The different breakdowns, whether it's Orthodox, conservative, and Jewish, Reformed, they seem more pronounced. And I would anticipate somebody certainly that is in the conservative end. It's really a challenge, I guess, to navigate, right?
It is, especially in the 21st century. There's no doubt about it. And the Jewish community is tiny. We lose sight of it in the Northeast because 43% of American Jews live here, but we're about 2% of the American population. So we're a tiny, tiny minority, and we're very diverse.
Finally, how much does the view and the role and the importance of Israel play into this conversation, if at all? Because that was part of the survey, where they were asking their connectivity to it, et cetera.
According to the survey, American Jews feel very connected to the state of Israel in a pretty high percentage. I was a little bit surprised by how high that percentage was, pleasantly surprised, if I might be honest. And but I still wonder what it really looks like for today's American Jews. What does it mean to feel strongly connected to Israel? According to the results, I think over 40% of American Jews have traveled to Israel, which is quite high. But how does that then have an effect on how they practice their Judaism? That would be my question.
Finally, I know we're heavy. If you found one thing that makes a material difference in the younger generation, where there's a greater likelihood that they sustain their faith, what would that introduction to what be?
What I've noticed in my personal experience is that if it is important to the parent, then it will be more likely to be important to the child. So if Jewish behavior is practiced at home, that will become part and parcel of a child's identity, and they'll be more likely to have that piece of their identity as they grow.
Same thing in the church.
Well, my quick question is, since Jewish is faith and culture, what does the assimilation do? We watch Irish assimilate, Italians assimilate. How does the assimilation of the Jewish culture affect the Jewish religion? That's curious to know.
So the numbers of people who are identifying as religiously Jewish have plummeted in the last decade or so. So as Jews assimilate more and more into American culture and society, they lose their sense of religious identity.
All right, Rabbi, thank you very much as always.
you.
I appreciate it. Great job. No more than we started, right?
Yes,
All right.
certainly did.
There we go.
Great job.
You're Jewish, right?
I am. I've been to Israel twice. I'm Jewish.
L'chaim. All right, we take a break here. When we come back, RFL continues. Stay with us.